have a startup that has the credit for being one of the Indian companies to be backed by the prestigious Y Combinator. Cleartax is now betting on newer areas like lending and mutual funds to up its game in the fintech space. How does it plan to guard its turf in the heavily competitive space? And what advice would they give to startups wanting to apply for Y Combinator? Rahul sat down with Archit Gupta to discuss all this and more.
How was 2019? GST, things have slowly settled down while there's still so much action happening. Did that really occupy a lot of your mind space over the last year?
Absolutely. So 2019 was a super exciting year for us, given the fact that the government with policy became very serious about digitizing businesses in India. So that was part number one. So what it led to was very rapid growth. We had raised $50 million at the end of 2018. We deployed all of that to go after the GST opportunity, really increasing our presence in the number of cities we operate in, increasing our headcount and everything. So what that led to is significant growth in the number of businesses using us. So we reach about 6 lakh businesses who we serve on GST. On the enterprise side, we serve now more enterprise businesses than all the big four combined on GST. So it's a big milestone for us because there are companies like Titan, Raymond's, Sun Pharma, etc., who use our product every day. So very, very exciting, significant growth in the software revenue, now expanding out more.
Got it. You're seeing B2B has clearly been a big driver, and we've seen a lot of companies tap the B2B. Makes a lot more sense to be, making money from them than incentivizing. But how about the entire B2C space of income tax and returns? That's something that you pioneered long back. Yeah. It took people a lot more time and effort, several calls to CAs, all of that to get done. You've simplified it. How is that side of the business faring?
Okay, yeah, so that's been excellent for us because of the fact that we are market leaders on that space. So we are continuing a strong growth path on that, and millions of Indian consumers use us every year. And what has happened is there is a continuous focus from our side to improve the product, improve the service. So I think rapid clip growth, and we are very, very confident that we'll be the dominant force on the income tax side, and no incentives, no customer cashbacks. It's all organic, and customers use us.
YC is increasingly spoken. They make a lot more trips to India, Bangalore now than they've ever done before. They clearly said that we're excited about the Indian market. We want to back, maybe double our focus on India. What would you advise to entrepreneurs really watching? Because it is every early stage startup's dream to really be on YC. What would you really advise someone who's been there, cracked it early on? What would you tell them?
So I think few very good things now. The Indian ecosystem is now far more mature. So actually, for entrepreneurs who don't make it to YC, actually no reason to be disheartened. So first that, because only so many startups will make it to YC, right? And that's not the end goal. The end goal is to make your startup successful. So one, the Indian ecosystem is far more mature than when I landed here. So a lot more angel rounds, a lot more seed rounds, a lot more VCs, a lot more funding. So very, very good time to be an entrepreneur. So that's part number one. Second, I think YC is a great start. It has a lot of high quality principles in which it helps the startup. So in terms of when you're applying, right, YC has this question list, I think it's a 14, 15 questions, which they want the entrepreneurs to answer. I think what they're looking for is crisp answers, 1 or 2 lines, not paragraphs and essays. I think they understand India now quite well because of the fact that they have now funded so many Indian startups, over 100.
And they have you people to rely back on.
Yeah, exactly. They reach out to us and so on and so forth. So they understand the Indian ecosystem. So I think crisp answers, having a clear why, what customer problem you are solving, that being very clear on the application, and then in the interview, just reach out to a YC alum, me or anybody, and learn how they ask questions and give high quality answers. I think they're looking to back entrepreneurs they like. So I think they have this interview process where there's 14 questions. I think to be honest, those 14 questions will take you 3-4 days to answer. They're great to answer because they tell you more about your startup.
Yeah.
So it's actually a
great way to know about yourself.
Great way
even if you don't make it to
even if you don't make it. And then I believe that they are funding more and more companies every year. So your odds of getting through are going up, because I believe they went from 1 company at our time to now 29 companies this batch. So it's big number jump. So I think and they'll continue to grow that.
And it's definitely a big gateway, right? In terms of the ecosystem connects that it brings to you globally, because YC itself has a network of its own startups that you can then tap into to see how it works out.
Absolutely. So I think like YC gives has given us access to so many like global parties. Like it could be like access to any investor, it could be access to any company which we want to collaborate with. It's also like sometimes technological access. I remember like there was one technological problem we were solving, then we reached out to somebody in the YC network and we were able to speak to the engineer who had solved this problem. So I mean that access is unparalleled. So it's a great network to be part of. And the other part is like I see like entrepreneurs coming through YC. Like I think like in 3-4 months they're like they significantly evolve. So I think the program helps a lot. And like with that said, like I really want to emphasize the Indian ecosystem is also more mature.
And you don't have to only rely.
Yeah, only rely on YC. But like if you get through, it's actually a good place.
No, nothing like that. That's something that clearly is the message from investors to entrepreneurs also. Save up what you have and ensure you're spending. But what really will be that big mega trend to watch out for this year? Let's set aside the debate of does the decade end or start this year or the end of this year. But this year, what really will be the big trend that will really stand out?
Right. So overall, at a meta, like fintech, this is the year of fintech. Like it will be a lot of action in fintech, like whether it's financing, whether it's other things. So I think like people can watch out for that at a ecosystem level, at a Cleartax level. So that's part number one. Part number two is like for us, like specifically GST and electronic invoicing are going to be two very big pillars. Electronic invoicing is going to be introduced in the country for the first time at a pilot level and so on and so forth. What is the macro trend here is digitization of Indian businesses. So Indian businesses using technology for the first time will happen, and that space is underserved, and we are helping. So those are the two big pillars. I think with rapid digitization, more data is going to be available, so that common thing most entrepreneurs in fintech are talking about, lending and treasury and mutual funds, those are going to be like an area of focus for us.
We'll come to mutual funds in a while because I want to spend some more time on that. But the entire proposition of credit, every player with the slightest hint to do anything with fintech wants to get into lending or credit. But are you exploring that space? Will you be launching some? Makes sense, right? You're sitting on a data mine. You know where people are spending, where they want to save. Makes sense for you to bridge that gap.
Right. So this is a very interesting question. Like because I'll talk about two things, right? Like in the Indian economy, right? Like non-collateralized lending is the main fintech trend, right? Like collateralized lending, banks like HDFC or what have you are very equipped to do. So in non-collateralized lending, actually GST data is one of the richest sources of data which can validate things about a customer, like tell you where he's spending, what he's buying, and so on and so forth. So the flows are very rich. Now for us, it's a question of time and not like if, but it's a question of when. So I think 2020, our more focus is going to be on software, but we will run a lot of pilots and experiments to learn more about the customer behavior. How do we collect? How do we like deploy capital? Maybe we will create credit card like instruments and so on and so forth. So something we are figuring out.
But definitely credit line on your mind. Yep. But Archit, how will you solve for it? Let's get realistic. We have a number of players. Any app that you download is willing to give you a loan in less than a minute without any questions asked. That's why questions if is there a ticking time bomb? Banks have taken years for it to figure out, and now you have new age startups coming out there and saying that a college student you are, don't worry, we have 5,000 to lend to you, you can pay. So it's a ticking time bomb, right? We haven't seen its early trends. We haven't seen data come by to suggest what. The only hardcore data we have is that of banks, which we closely track. But NPAs will be an issue here as well if you're left, right and center lending to whom you want to lend to.
Right. So I think two big things. Like one is like we are not like planning to get into consumer lending. So on the consumer side, like our belief is like the wealth creation, investing, savings, those kind of things we'll talk about. But on the business side, like we are targeting businesses which are like in the GST system. So that broadly means that the turnover is slightly above 1 crore or what have you. So predictability a little bit, like continuity of business. So have they been around and so on and so forth. Definitely collections is a thing we are thinking about. Like so the initial hypothesis is maybe we partner and we work with the ecosystem, and we are not a credit like engine ourselves, and we are working with the ecosystem and like that may be the hypothesis in the beginning.
Good. You want to be there, but you have a broad line drawn on what you don't want to cross while you go out there and experience the pilots in credit. Moving on, mutual funds, something that you've dabbled in, still a minor play, but an increasing focus area. What have you really learned from them? That's again a very crowded space, right?
Absolutely.
You know, several players, really. Consumer awareness also is increasing, so people know what they want to go after. How will you really solve for the space of mutual funds?
Yeah, so I think like, I think you're absolutely right that there have been recent players which have entered the space, and my belief is the customers continue to be underserved. So I feel like when we as Cleartax look to solve the problem, and we've been talking to hundreds of or thousands of our customers, the problem is really savings investing as a whole, and mutual fund forms like a 15-20%, 10% of their bucket. So the rest 80-90% of the money, the wallet of savings actually goes in savings bank, fixed deposits, and so on and so forth. So I think we want to solve it like more holistically. So that's part number one. Part number two is like, I think the space is very exciting. There'll be like 4 or 5 large players, including us. I don't think this is a winner-take-all market. So I think like there will be like 4 or 5 large, meaningful players. That's what has been observed in the US, in other geographies. And there's also this new movement of neo banks and stuff. So they'll also try to come into MF and stuff. But like, what has happened is mutual funds with the rise of direct funds has led to no business model in this, because advisory is still very small business in India. So I think like people will have to find alternate monetization in the consumer side, and mutual funds itself is not going to lead to monetization.
You know, Archit, while you're telling me that it won't be a winner-take-all market as far as mutual funds is concerned, the big disruptor in the space, and we've seen it in telecom, how it's completely, changed the status quo, impacted players, and how Jio now has plans for mutual funds. Of course, these are reports. That would be a big game changer, right? How would you guard your turf even as you go around with those experiments to see how this will fare?
Right. So my belief is Jio is more likely to be a manufacturer, and like given their distribution reach and given their nature historically of going full stack, I think it makes more sense, like to me outside in, for them to be a manufacturer, and we can then be a distributor to Jio's funds or like HDFC's funds or ICICI fund and so on and so forth. So I still think the plan still needs to, the story needs to play out. I think notionally Jio is a threat to any startup, so I actually think like for them to get so many things right,
and they've been dabbling with too many things, but telecom is something that they've clearly, changed in terms of how disrupted the space, so much so that the incumbent players seem to be complaining. But you do have your eyes and ears, so to say, to watch out to what Jio is doing.
So I think like from our perspective, I think we continue to be very, very customer backwards. For us, mutual funds is only going to be like 10-20% of the offering on their savings wallet, right? Like, so people generally will not put like all their wallet on MF or all their wallet on. So I think like our approach is to work customer backwards to solve like a few problems on millennials for savings their money and investing their money. Some portion of which will go into a mutual fund. So I'm not stressed on that. And in terms of Indian businesses digitizing, we are building like very high quality software and launching things after launching things which are getting mass adoption in the business.
You have a lot more on your table.
Yeah, so we are not like feeling stressed around this dimension at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Considering mutual funds is not the only thing that you do. Yeah. Interesting. Last couple of questions. Let's talk to us about the early journey. You've spoken about how when you started off Cleartax, you had to move from US where you had a stable job, and for 3 years you survived on your savings while you really made this happen, and then Y Combinator happens. Now everyone knows about Y Combinator, not back then. What really changed after, how did you convince Y Combinator back to be one of the first Indian startups to be backed by them early on?
Right. So I think like if you go back in time, like in 2014 was the year when we went to YC, right? Like the Y Combinator was not like, I don't think they were thinking India at that time, and I don't think there was an India play. So like what we figured was they had funded this one company in Brazil in 2013, and we then thought like they could do international, and so we were at that time assessing like who can help us grow to the next level. And so we had talked to angels in India and like VCs in India, and what I figured was the Indian ecosystem was fairly like not mature at that time, and like I'd been in the US ecosystem, the Bay Area ecosystem, which was very, very mature, and the Indian ecosystem was not the case. So then I think YC was a very pivotal force, driver force in like in terms of the application, the how was like we wrote a solid good application. We were just focused on like answering their questions very clearly. I think we got through. So I think no rocket science to it, but like the simple fact that we saw that like they could be interested, and we applied and see.
What changed for you after they came on board?
Absolutely.
Because that was clearly a U-turn, right,
Yes,
in
yes.
terms of a journey and how upswing really came by. What really changed for you? Define that.
I think like it brought a conviction to everybody that like this is an important company in India, right? Like so that was part number one. So that conviction gives you access to better funding. Like so we had Sequoia, Founders Fund, Max Levchin, Naval Ravikant,
All of them reach out.
invested in our company,
So
right?
YC was your gateway to all of that.
Yeah, so that was part number one. Second was like even the guys in India who liked us like invested only after that. So I think like that was the funny part, right? Like they got social proof. But after that, like I think there was no looking back. Safe Partners, like Composite Capital, which has put in like $50 million in our company. So I think like overall, like I think that was a very seminal moment in like A, the ecosystem for India, and B, Cleartax, both. Yeah.
Is LinkedIn the place to come to if they get through those initial tests?
Absolutely.
You want to reach out?
Absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn, and like you can write to me anytime. Like I'm very available. I'm like I review a lot of IC applications. I help entrepreneurs interview. I even help them like sometimes like if they're struggling with something. I'll like.
So that's excellence. That's Archit Gupta of Cleartax clearly telling you entrepreneurs if you want to and need some help, he's always there on LinkedIn. We do reach out to him, and if he does not respond, tell us and we'll ensure that he does.